Russia started this war with 13,000 tanks. Today, they are running out. Not because Ukraine is winning, not because NATO is supplying better weapons. Because Russia's entire military-industrial complex is collapsing under the weight of three invisible forces nobody is talking about, and the implications go far beyond Ukraine. In this video, I am going to show you exactly what is happening inside Russia's tank factories, at their storage bases, and across their entire defense supply chain. The numbers are public, the satellite images are available, and the timeline is visible. And what you are about to learn changes everything about how this war ends. As of November 2025, Russia has lost over 11,000 tanks, according to Ukrainian military claims. Visual confirmation from Oryx, an independent military analysis group that only counts losses with photographic or video evidence, puts the number at over 4,000 tanks destroyed, captured, or abandoned. The real number is somewhere in between. But both tell the same story. Russia is losing tanks faster than any military in modern history. In 2025 alone, Ukrainian forces destroyed or damaged over 1,000 Russian tanks in just the first 5 months. That is 200 tanks per month. At the start of the full-scale invasion in February 2022, Russia deployed approximately 3,300 operational tanks to the front. Those are gone, every single one. The tanks you see on Ukrainian battlefields today are replacements pulled from storage bases scattered across Russia, refurbished in factories working around the clock, or newly built at facilities operating at maximum capacity. And the pace is unsustainable, because while Russia started this war with massive reserves, those reserves are disappearing. Satellite analysis of Russian storage bases shows that tank inventories have fallen from 7,300 units in early 2022 to approximately 3,500 by the end of 2024. That is a 52% reduction, and most of what remains is in terrible condition. Researchers tracking these bases report that the best tanks were pulled first. What is left has been sitting outside, exposed to the elements, for decades. Between February 2024 and February 2025, Russia pulled only 342 tanks from storage. Compare that to 2023, when they withdrew over 2,200 tanks. The rate of extraction has collapsed by more than 600%. Why? Because the easy-to-restore vehicles are gone. What remains requires extensive repair work, replacement parts that do not exist, and time Russia does not have. Let us talk about what Russia is actually building. The flagship of Russian tank production is the T-90M Proryev, their most modern main battle tank. According to leaked internal documents from Uralvagonzavod, Russia's sole tank manufacturer, production of the T-90M reached approximately 240 to 300 units in 2024. Ambitious internal plans call for production to hit 1,000 T-90Ms per year by 2028. But these are not all new tanks. Many T-90Ms are older T-90A models that have been stripped down and rebuilt with upgraded armor, electronics, and weapons systems. It's modernization, not production. True new build capacity is far lower. Analysts estimate Russia can build only 60 to 90 genuinely new tanks per year. Everything else is refurbishment. And refurbishment depends on having old tanks to refurbish, which brings us back to the storage problem. The math does not work. Russia is losing 200 to 400 tanks per month, depending on the intensity of fighting. Even at the peak claimed production of 1,500 tanks per year, which includes both new builds and refurbishments, that is 125 tanks per month. They are losing tanks faster than they can replace them. But it gets worse. The production figures Russia publishes are inflated by including repairs. When a T-90M gets hit by a Ukrainian drone, pulled off the battlefield, sent to a repair facility, and returned to service 4 weeks later, Russia counts that as production. It is not. It is maintenance. The actual number of tanks being added to Russia's inventory is far lower than official statistics suggest. And production is constrained by factors beyond simple manufacturing capacity. Uralvagonzavod employs approximately 12,000 workers. During the Soviet era, that same facility employed over 30,000. Russia is trying to match Soviet-era output with less than half the workforce. They are running 3-shift operations, offering premium wages to attract workers, and still facing labor shortages estimated at 140,000 to 400,000 workers across the entire defense industry. The facility is also dealing with equipment degradation. Continuous operation without proper maintenance cycles is wearing out production machinery. Western sanctions have cut off access to advanced computer numerical control machine tools needed for precision manufacturing. China supplies replacements, but Chinese equipment is of lower quality and breaks down more frequently. This creates production bottlenecks that slow output and reduce quality. But the most important factor is not production capacity or storage-based depletion. It is what is happening on the battlefield. And what is happening is a revolution in warfare that is making tanks obsolete in ways nobody predicted. First-person view drones are now responsible for 65% of all Russian armored vehicle losses in Ukraine. Not artillery, not anti-tank missiles, drones. Small, cheap, commercially available drones that cost $500 to $1,500 each and are destroying tanks worth $2 million to $4 million. Ukrainian drone operators, working from positions miles behind the front lines, pilot these first-person view drones directly into Russian tanks, hitting weak points in the armor where they cause catastrophic damage. A single drone can mission kill a tank, forcing the crew to abandon it. And Ukraine is producing these drones at scale. They manufactured 1.4 million drones in 2024 alone. That is industrial-scale production of tank killers at a fraction of the cost of traditional anti-tank weapons. The impact on Russian tactics has been dramatic. Starting in late 2024, Russian forces began reducing their use of heavy armor in assaults. Instead of sending columns of tanks and armored vehicles, they started using light vehicles, motorcycles, and even civilian cars. Why? Because Ukrainian drones hunt tanks first. A tank is a high-value target. A civilian vehicle or motorcycle is of lower priority and costs Russia less when it is destroyed. This shift is visible in the casualty data. In September through November 2024, Ukrainian forces destroyed 300 to 400 Russian tanks per month. By December 2024 through January 2025, that number dropped to 200 to 240 tanks per month. Not because Russian armor became more survivable, but because Russia stopped using as much armor. And this creates a vicious cycle. The less Russia uses tanks, the less experience their tank crews get. The less effective their armor becomes. The more they shift to infantry assaults without armored support, and the more casualties they take. Ukrainian sources report that Russian vehicle losses overall increased from 1,000 per month in mid-2024 to 3,000 per month by the end of the year. But these were mostly light vehicles and unarmored trucks, not tanks. Russia is compensating for the vulnerability of heavy armor by sending more light vehicles and infantry. But infantry without armor support takes far higher casualties. Russian military casualties reached approximately 790,000 killed or wounded by April 2025, according to U.S. estimates. They are on pace to hit 1 million casualties by summer 2025. Most people think sanctions are not working because Russia is still fighting. They are wrong. Sanctions are not supposed to stop the war immediately. They are supposed to degrade Russia's ability to sustain the war over time. And that is exactly what is happening. Russia's tank production depends on components it cannot make domestically. Advanced optical sights, thermal imaging systems, precision electronics, high-quality steel alloys, and computer numerical control machine tools all require technology that Russia does not have. Before the war, Russia imported these components from Western countries. Now they cannot, so they are evading sanctions through third countries. China is the largest supplier, providing semiconductors, microelectronics, and machine tools. Kazakhstan, which borders Russia, has become a major transshipment hub. Trade data shows Kazakhstan's exports of microelectronics to Russia increased by 567% after the war began. But Kazakhstan is not making these semiconductors. They are importing them from the European Union and re-exporting them to Russia. The United Arab Emirates, Turkey, India, Malaysia, and Central Asian countries are all playing similar roles. But this is not free. Sanctions evasion adds cost, delays, and unpredictability. Components that used to cost $100 and arrive in 2 weeks now cost $300 and arrive in 2 months, if they arrive at all. Russian defense companies are competing with each other for limited supplies of critical components, driving prices higher. And the components they do get are often lower quality than what they need. This shows up in production. Russian T-90 MiZ are being delivered incomplete, missing critical optical sights and electronic systems because those parts are not available. Some tanks wait months at the factory for components to arrive. This is why leaked production documents show delivery schedules slipping and targets being missed. Western governments are tightening the screws. In January 2025, the United States sanctioned nearly 250 entities involved in supplying Russia with advanced technology, including dozens of Chinese companies. The European Union added 189 vessels to its sanctions list in May 2025, targeting Russia's shadow fleet used to transport oil and generate revenue. The UK sanctioned 100 new targets in May 2025, including 50 financial institutions helping Russia evade sanctions. These actions are forcing Russia to work harder, pay more, and take longer to get what it needs. And over time, that accumulates. It's death by 1,000 cuts, not instant collapse, but gradual degradation that makes everything harder, more expensive, and less effective. Now, let's go deeper into the storage bases, because this is where the math becomes inescapable. Russia started the war with tank reserves stored at central bases across the country. These weren't active-duty tanks. They were older Soviet-era vehicles, preserved and stored for potential future use. The theory was that in a major war, Russia could pull these tanks out, refurbish them, and put them back into service. And that's exactly what they did. From 2022 to 2024, Russia withdrew approximately 4,000 tanks from storage that were in the best technical condition. These tanks required minimal repairs. Clean them up, replace some rubber seals, check the engine, and install modern electronics, and they're combat ready. But those tanks are gone now. What remains are tanks that have been sitting outside for 30, 40, or even 50 years, exposed to rain, snow, and temperature extremes. Rubber deteriorates, engines seize, electronics corrode, rust weakens structural components. Many of these tanks are beyond repair. Satellite analysis shows researchers examining Russian storage bases and identifying what they call tank graveyards, sections of the bases where tanks have been systematically stripped for parts. These aren't vehicles that will ever run again. They're scrap metal. Open-source researcher Jompy, who monitors Russian storage bases using satellite imagery, reported in July 2025 that Russia had started drawing T-72B tanks from the 1,311 storage base at a rate of 20 tanks per month. At that pace, the base will be empty soon. Once that happens, Russia will turn to base 349, which holds 586 T-72A tanks, and base 2,544, which holds 215 units. But Jompy notes that most of these tanks are in poor or terrible condition. Even more concerning, the 1,311 base no longer contains T-80BV tanks, suggesting Russia may have exhausted its reserves of T-80s. And T-55 and T-62 tanks, which are decades older and far less capable than modern armor, are now being pulled from storage. These are tanks from the 1960s and 1970s. They're essentially obsolete against modern anti-tank weapons. Educational institutions are being stripped of equipment. In May 2025, satellite imagery showed that the Omsk Tank Automotive Engineering Institute, which used to hold 120 tanks, 89 armored personnel carriers, and 41 infantry fighting vehicles for training purposes, had been completely emptied. This equipment, which was supposed to be used to train future tank engineers, has been sent to the front because Russia has nothing else left to send. By early 2025, only about 1,200 tanks in storage were considered relatively easy to restore. The rest will take months or years to repair, assuming they can be repaired at all. And the number of tanks being withdrawn from storage has collapsed. From 2022 to 2023, thousands were removed annually. From 2024 to 2025, only 342 tanks were withdrawn. The pace dropped by 85%. Russia's defense industry is facing constraints that go beyond production capacity. The entire system is overheating. Defense spending reached 6.3% of GDP in 2025, the highest since the Cold War ended. That's roughly $150 billion per year, or about one-third of the entire Russian federal budget. And it's still not enough. The industry is unprofitable. Russian defense companies are supposed to operate sustainably with small, manageable losses. Instead, they're suffering significant losses because the Ministry of Defense demands low prices while costs are rising due to sanctions, labor shortages, and component scarcity. The government is subsidizing the difference, but that's not sustainable long term. Labor markets are breaking. The defense industry needs qualified engineers, machinists, welders, and technicians. But these workers are in short supply because Russia's education system isn't producing enough of them, and older workers are retiring without replacements. The government estimates a workforce gap of 140,000 to 400,000 workers. Companies are offering premium wages, but there simply aren't enough people with the right skills. Uralvagonzavod is trying to scale up by investing in automated welding systems, CNC machine tools, and continuous three-shift operations. But this equipment requires maintenance, skilled operators, and spare parts. And Western sanctions have cut off access to the best equipment. Russia is buying what it can from China, but Chinese industrial equipment is less reliable and breaks down more frequently. Quality is declining. When production is rushed, quality suffers. Reports from the front indicate that Russian tanks are arriving with defects: welds that crack under stress, electronics that fail, and armor that doesn't meet specifications. This isn't just anecdotal. Internal Russian documents show quality control failures and delivery delays. Innovation has stagnated. Russia is not developing new tank designs. They're upgrading old ones. The T-90M is based on the T-90, which is based on the T-72, which was designed in the 1970s. It's a 50-year-old platform with modern electronics bolted on. Meanwhile, Western countries are developing next-generation tanks with remote-controlled turrets, active protection systems, and AI-assisted targeting. The technology gap is widening, and Russia can't close it because their military-industrial complex is in what researchers call innovation stagnation. They're relying on Soviet-era research and legacy systems because they don't have the technical capacity or resources to develop genuinely new technologies. Sanctions have cut off access to the most advanced components. Domestic production can't fill the gap. And the result is a defense industry that's treading water, not advancing. So what happens next? The data points to a critical inflection point approaching in late 2025 or early 2026. At current attrition rates and production capacity, Russia will face a severe shortage of usable tanks, not zero tanks, but too few to conduct large-scale offensive operations. Western intelligence assessments consistently point to this timeline. The British International Institute for Strategic Studies concluded in early 2025 that Russia's tank losses were staggering and that equipment remaining in storage is highly likely to be run down, poorly maintained, and possibly rusted beyond usability. German publication Süddeutsche Zeitung estimated in mid-2024 that if fighting continued at the same intensity, Russian tank reserves would last another 2 to 3 years. Multiple U.S. intelligence analyses reach similar conclusions. But you have to understand what this means. It doesn't mean Russia runs out of tanks and immediately surrenders. It means they have to change how they fight, and they're already changing. The shift from tank-led assaults to infantry and light vehicle assaults is that adaptation. Russia is accepting higher infantry casualties to preserve their remaining armor. They're using tanks more conservatively, keeping them in defensive positions or as mobile artillery rather than spearheading attacks. This changes the nature of the war. Without overwhelming armored superiority, Russia can't conduct the kind of mechanized breakthrough operations that would allow it to make rapid territorial gains. Instead, they're grinding forward through attrition, taking heavy casualties to capture small amounts of ground. In 2025, Russian forces have been gaining an average of 168 square miles per month in Ukraine. That's roughly 2 Manhattan Islands per week. At that rate, it would take decades to conquer Ukraine. The economic pressure is mounting. Russia's economy is in a militarized state, with 3.5 to 4.5 million people employed in the defense industry. Civilian sectors are being starved of investment and labor. The government is running deficits, spending down reserves, and relying on oil and gas revenues that are declining due to sanctions and price caps. Inflation is above target. The ruble is weak. Living standards are falling. Russia can sustain this for a while, maybe another year, maybe 2, but not indefinitely. And the longer it continues, the more damage accumulates. Every tank lost is one they can't easily replace. Every worker killed or wounded is someone they don't have to build equipment for. Every component they can't import is a weakness in their supply chain. First, it demonstrates that modern surveillance and precision weapons have fundamentally changed armored warfare. Tanks, which dominated battlefields for a century, are now extremely vulnerable to cheap drones. Any military planning for future conflicts has to account for this. The U.S. Army is already rewriting its doctrine, creating specialized drone units, and rethinking how tanks are used. Other militaries are watching and adapting. Second, it shows the long-term effectiveness of economic sanctions against military capability. Sanctions don't stop wars immediately, but they work as a cumulative force over time, degrading an adversary's ability to sustain operations. This is a lesson for future conflicts. Economic tools can be as important as military ones. Third, it reveals the limits of Soviet-era military stockpiles. Russia inherited massive reserves from the USSR, thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft. For decades, analysts assumed these reserves gave Russia enormous military power. But those reserves are finite. They've been consumed at astonishing rates, and once they're gone, Russia will have to rebuild from scratch, which will take decades and resources they don't have. Fourth, it highlights the importance of industrial capacity in modern war. Wars aren't won just by having the best technology. They're won by being able to produce, maintain, and replace equipment faster than your opponent can destroy it. Ukraine, despite being far smaller and poorer than Russia, has demonstrated superior adaptation through its drone industry. They've industrialized warfare in a way that's giving them a qualitative advantage. And finally, it exposes Russia's long-term military weakness. Once this war ends, Russia will face an almost insurmountable challenge rebuilding its military. Their tank fleet is depleted. Their storage bases are empty. Their industrial capacity is strained. Their economy is damaged. Their workforce is depleted. It will take decades to recover, assuming they even try. This changes the calculus of European security. A Russia without a functioning tank force is a Russia that can't invade its neighbors with the same ease it once could. NATO countries are reassessing their defense priorities based on this reality. The threat hasn't disappeared, but it's changed shape. Russia isn't running out of tanks because of any single factor. It's the combination of battlefield losses, industrial constraints, storage-based depletion, sanctions effects, drone warfare, and systemic weaknesses in their military-industrial complex. Each of these factors compounds the others. Losses drive demand for replacements. Replacement needs strain production. Production constraints increase reliance on storage. Storage depletion forces use of lower quality vehicles. Lower quality vehicles suffer higher loss rates. The cycle accelerates. The timeline is visible. The data is public. The trajectory is clear. Russia entered this war with what appeared to be overwhelming advantages in heavy armor. They had more tanks than Ukraine could ever hope to destroy. But war is not a spreadsheet. Numbers matter less than sustainability, adaptation, and industrial capacity. And on all three metrics, Russia is failing. They're not out of tanks yet, but they're running out. And when they do, the war changes. Not ends necessarily, but changes. Russia will have to fight differently, with different tools, accepting different costs. And every passing month makes that future more certain. This is the real story of Russia's tank crisis. Not a sudden collapse, gradual, inexorable decline. A war machine that looked unstoppable in February 2022, slowly grinding itself down against Ukrainian resistance, Western sanctions, technological innovation, and its own systemic failures. The question isn't if Russia runs out of combat-effective armor. The question is, what happens when they do?